Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Calley, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I want to say thank you to our sponsor, Consumers Credit Union. You can learn more about what they can do for you at consumerscu.org. All right, so we do have a couple of special guests joining us today, but before we get to them, Brian, let's check in with the latest inflation numbers.
Yeah, the big stakes for these inflation reports because they do determine whether or not future interest rate increases happen, and so I would say that overall, this is what today's report was about what the Federal Reserve is expecting, and therefore probably nothing that would derail. In their meeting coming up in about 3 weeks, a 0.25% increase, which may end up being the last increase at least for a while. But the headline inflation, so the overall inflation was 5% flat, 5.0%. It was down compared to last month, and down in terms of the increase, a smaller increase, put it that way, smaller increase. And then the core inflation, which is the one that takes food and energy out, so the commodity-based inflation components out, core inflation was actually higher than headline inflation. And that is the first time that's happened since we've had this kind of rampant 40-year high inflation. And what that means is that those core items, services in particular that have a heavy labor component, are stubbornly high. And so we see headline inflation at 5 and 5.6% on core inflation. Now, if you look at the monthly numbers, the headline inflation was up month over month 0.1%. So I have to believe that the Federal Reserve would be real happy with that. Energy is a big part of the reason why it was that small. So comparatively, energy costs have gone down. I'll get to that in a minute. And then with the core inflation, that was up month over month 0.4%. So annualizing that number, you'd have to multiply it times 12. So that's still, again, not as bad as February. February was more like 0.5, now 0.4. So still increasing core inflation a little bit better than last month. So slowly inching in the right direction. They also published categories, and gasoline actually was one of the deflation factors. So that headline inflation, the one that includes commodities, gas and food, that one went down because of fuel oil and gasoline. Now OPEC is going to probably going to raise prices, so it might reverse that with the OPEC countries restricting supply. But airline airfare was the number one category, again, at about 20%. And motor vehicle maintenance and repair, electricity, food away from home. So some services there that are all at the top of the increase category. So those are the things that are keeping that core inflation higher.
All right, let's move on to our first guest. We have Mark Ware with Mission Point Resort joining us. And Brian, you two have been working together on SBAM's Unemployment Insurance Task Force. So why don't you go ahead and introduce a little bit more about that project, and we'll welcome Mark.
Great. So we're really fortunate to have so many of our policy initiatives that are driven by actual small business owners. We got a great, talented staff. We love to organize and to support businesses, but it's really the policy and the discussion, the priorities are driven by our members. Mark Ware, one of the owners of Mission Point on Mackinac Island, is also on our board of directors, and he has chaired our unemployment task force. And the purpose of this task force is to inform the work that's happening in the government and the state government's modernization work group on unemployment. So they're considering potentially some pretty big changes, and we want to make sure that we're carrying the concerns of small businesses into that. So let's start with Mark. Maybe just a little bit about about Mission Point, and if you don't mind, actually, I've heard you recite last season the some of the workforce challenges, which is really kind of the impetus around this unemployment system. As you get applications and how many people apply and how many people are selected and who shows up at the end of the day. I think it's a great way maybe to set the stage for this part of the discussion.
Sure. Hi, Brian. Thanks so much for having me today. Really appreciate it. And thank you so much for setting up this task force. It's been great to work with other business owners and HR professionals to really understand the issues that we're facing with unemployment and the Unemployment Insurance Agency. At Mission Point, we are a seasonal business, and so we we go through a hiring process every year. And last year was a good example where we had around 300 applicants looking for jobs. But after you do the applications, you have to go through and hire them. Then you get the phone calls, and then you get the no-shows, right? So after you 300 applicants, we started to interview folks, but the times they're calling them back, you get down to about 90 people that are actually responding to the emails. Then you start to do job offers, and we offered like 89 of the 90 people a job offer. And then you expect them to show up in April to start working, and then you get down to about 40 to 35 of them that actually show up to work. So it's really a struggle to get those folks. And a lot of them are coming in because they're applying for the jobs because they're staying on unemployment and they're required to apply for a job, but they're not actually showing up to take that job and they're staying on unemployment. And that was one of the key areas that we found in the task force is that we need to focus on increased accountability so that employers have a way to inform the Unemployment Insurance Agency that these folks are just calling in. They're not making a serious effort or they've been offered a job. But there's no way to inform the Unemployment Agency that this is happening right now.
And I can just feel among the audience of people nodding in agreement, like people are really experiencing this across the board, where there's a lot of busy work, a lot of extra effort that businesses are putting in when so many of the applicants aren't really truly looking for a job. So as we work in the unemployment modernization work group as in the government, the first step. It's going to be a long process, but the first step is to establish priorities. What are the priorities that small businesses would have? And it was really a pretty nice, report that was generated and provided into the agency for this work, and it kind of neatly lays it out. Why don't you give us a sense of an outline of those priorities that we're starting with?
Sure. So there were 4 real priorities that we identified in this task force. And the first was that increased accountability. So the idea that we really want to be able to, as employers, report back and say, hey, there's something going on here and that there are folks that are trying to cheat the system, and we want to be able to tell them that this is going on. The second is that it has to be simple and efficient. We spend too much time as businesses getting lost in bureaucratic work, trying to go through hoops and hurdles and just to get the system to work. And it's too hard to even find the information. We can get hundreds of emails, just a lot of information where we get really lost. It's just not simple or efficient for us. And one of the ones that I think is most important, it has to encourage work, right? So the system that we have to have has to incentivize people to go back to work and not to just stay on unemployment. We've got to find a way to get people back in businesses, supporting all of our businesses. And then we want to make sure that we are minimizing the consequences of long-term unemployment. So with long-term unemployment, we're seeing folks that they're losing some of the skills that they had before. They're losing some of the social networks that they had that would keep them employed. We want to make sure that we're minimizing those types of things so that folks are getting back to work quickly and not just staying in a long-term unemployment situation.
Yeah, and I really liked rounding out the report on pointing out that there are big harms and consequences to people who remain unemployed for longer than necessary, and longer term unemployment, accommodating that or making it more attractive, it doesn't really help a person. In a lot of ways, it hurts them, especially in the long term. And when we have less than 60% labor force participation in Michigan today, one of the lowest in the nation, it's really important that we get on top of this. Mark, I want to thank you for your work and dedication to not just this task force, but all things SBAM. And this will be really important work. We're going to want to come back from time to time. I expect stages of this work as we engage with state government on it. And so I'm sure we'll have you back when we get to the next stage. But thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you for your leadership with SBAM. We really appreciate it. Take care and have a great day.
Thank you. All right. Well, we, as Sarah had mentioned, we have a couple of guests. We also have an SBAM team member joining us today as well that I don't think has been on the briefing before. His name is Jared Rodriguez. He's the managing partner of one of our subsidiaries that does association management and government relations for individual businesses. But actually, Jared, let's start with that before we get to an issue that you've been a real leader on in the past that we've had some big important steps this week on. Just a little bit about MainStreet and what you do here at SBAM.
Thank you, Brian and Sarah, for having me on today. Much appreciated. So MainStreet Legislative Consulting is ultimately another vehicle for small businesses in Michigan to have a voice before our state lawmakers and administration. So we work quite closely with SBAM members as well as non-members, which are prospect members. And we ultimately help them and guide folks through the process of the legislative sausage making, like I call it, and ultimately help make sure that any legislation that comes up before the legislature is favorable to our clients and ultimately SBAM members.
All right, excellent. Well, this is one of those things where sometimes there's, you have an individual small business has a need, and it's not the sort of thing where SBAM, we work on a lot of broad issues, but when you have an individual need that might be anything from a specific process you want to engage or a law you want to impact, or even through the appropriations process, it's a great service that is available. Now, Jared, a few years ago, the state government passed a policy that's part of the SBAM platform of criminal justice reform, automatic expungement. Let's start with, before we get into the why, what is automatic expungement?
Well, ultimately, how do we get to this point? So, expungement is ultimately a removal of a criminal record and or a set aside of a criminal record, criminal conviction that an individual has had. Prior to just this week on Tuesday, individuals that were seeking to have an expungement or have past convictions removed from their record would have to go through the court process and petition the court for those offenses to be expunged. So it's very costly, and certainly those that need it most are often economically challenged and don't have the resources to hire an attorney and go to court. So what was passed in 2020 was overwhelmingly bipartisan, and ultimately sets up an automatic process so that someone's time and economic status doesn't get in the way of a new beginning or a reset, if you will. So we're excited with what happened this week, and it's a process that will be automatic. You don't have to go to court. It's handled by the state of Michigan through the court process, working with law enforcement as well. And it is kicked off this week. And there are approximately 2 million Michiganders, neighbors, friends, colleagues that have some sort of conviction or history. Ultimately, what this is going to afford is around 400,000 individuals in the state will completely have their record sealed and or cleared. There's another 600,000 individuals that will have partial expungement, if you will. So we're talking about 1 million different citizens in the state of Michigan, and this will have a significant impact on so many different areas.
Yeah, and this was our interest in this really ties to workforce. So there are many professions where literally if somebody has a criminal record, they don't qualify. They can't legally can't be hired. But it's also there's a lot of evidence that what a person will even aspire to do, jobs that they're willing to go after, or changing jobs if they're looking to climb up the economic ladder, if they have a criminal record, they don't even try. And so in this case, to be clear, you're talking about nonviolent criminal records that are very old. So a person hasn't been in trouble for the last 10 years, and they had done some. And here's the other thing too. Look, there's a fine line between people that have a criminal record and people that did something stupid when they're younger and there wasn't any cops around. Like that's just a fact. But there are a couple of million people that do. And that have this kind of anchor holding them down. And it's also one of the factors in a lower labor force participation rate. And so by about 400,000 nonviolent offenders that have had a clean record that haven't had any problems in the last decade, this will be automatic. And it's a fresh start. I'm really excited for whether or not we'll see in the next few months, maybe a little bump in employment activity tied to this expungement process. So what happens from here, Jared? I know we've got, like, this was Tuesday was like a big day where this people were kind of run through a system that sorted out who qualified and it's done. How about other people that maybe, let's say somebody has a record that otherwise would qualify, but it was 9 years ago. I mean, does another law have to pass? What happens from here?
Well, you kind of set up the time frame. There's two different, I guess, offenses. You have felonies, which are nonviolent, that are eligible for automatic expungement, but you also have misdemeanors. And serious misdemeanors like domestic violence are not included in automatic expungement. But ultimately, for misdemeanors, it's 7 years. So if you have had 7 years of no mistakes, no mix-ups or anything like that, misdemeanors would automatically fall off. And it's 10 years for felonies. So data shows that it's more like 5 years. If you don't have or reoffend within 5 years, that you have no higher propensity to create strife and have a new crime that you're going to commit than anyone else that's never had a conviction before. So at this point, it's pretty set in stone right now in law that it's 7 years and 10 years. There have been some talks that let's see how this goes, because we may have to kind of move up that timeline based on true data.
And will it be an ongoing process of kind of a rolling process then? So like next year, there'll be a new batch of people that potentially would qualify for expungement?
Absolutely. I think the numbers are somewhere around 200,000 a year would automatically start falling off. So while the first year that we're experiencing automatic expungement would be about 1 million folks, I think every year that rolling year, if you will, for both misdemeanors and felonies will continue to fall off people's records.
Great. Well, this is just one of the areas of criminal justice reform that we work, and it's something that we wanted to make sure that people were aware of. And as it's evolving all the time, the employment practices and applications, and we want to make sure that business owners, are in a position to decide for themselves who they want to work for them and not. And this is really a step toward that, in that there are more people that will qualify for more jobs today, literally hundreds of thousands of them, because of this action that was taken. So Jared, thanks for your work on it. Thanks for you're actually the one that kind of put this on the table for SBAM to really consider supporting. And now that we're deep into it, really proud of this happening, and hopefully we'll be at a point where we can start seeing our labor force participation start to tick up and maybe beat the national average instead of trailing it.
Well, thank you, Brian, and to SBAM. You were a critical voice at the table in 2020 when this was needed. And ultimately, folks' criminal records shouldn't be a life sentence to less opportunities. This is going to help housing, employment opportunities, increased wages. Like you said, we hope to see a workforce participation continue to increase as automatic expungement continues.
Great. All right. Thanks so much, Jared.
Thank you.
Well, that is the show that we have for you today. Thanks for tuning in, and we will look forward to on Monday checking back in with you. We'll have I'll go over the inflation again on Monday, but and we'll have the graph so you can see kind of how it all comes together. But look forward to seeing you then. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great week. We'll see you back here on Monday.